Hey everyone, welcome once again to yet another episode of our taboo busting alphabetical journey. And today is V for Vitriol. That's right, V. We're so far into the alphabet at this point, but I'm gonna keep off reminiscing back throughout the alphabet and actually talk a little bit about this word of today, vitriol. We considered a lot of different options for V, but the reason why we wanted to take this one was because, especially seeing as most people that will watch this will come across it on social media. And these days, we're seeing a lot of vitriolic comments and conversations on social media with people really taking a lot of negativity and anger towards people that have, in many cases, not done anything to really deserve it. But someone who definitely deserves to be invited into this conversation before I move forward is Sylvia. So, Sylvia, welcome once again, and really looking forward to covering this yet another taboo topic with you today.
Thank you for the generous and warm invitation, which is the complete opposite of vitriol. Thank you for that, my friend.
Well, I hope that a lot of things I do in day-to-day life can be described as the direct, literal opposite of vitriol, but
I can vouch for
but
that. You do. You do. I can vouch for that.
but but I feel like this is a really timely topic, as has been the case for a lot of other topics that we've talked about, because with the immense amount of pressure that people are feeling these days, I think that's coming through in a lot of people having shorter fuses than usual. And I know if I speak for myself, I find myself when I'm under a lot of stress or pressure, I'm feeling anxious, I definitely feel that frustration bubbling under the surface. So I feel like the two facets I really want to touch upon in today's episode is one of them being how to deal with when others aim that vitriol at you to stop yourself from, I guess, stooping down to their level, but also how to control or how to sort of rein back some of the negativity that we might be tempted to inflict on others in those moments where it doesn't seem that easy to hold it back.
I love the framing, and I like to posit a question back to you first, if I may. So I had this sort of insight just a second ago that most people probably aren't vitriolic by nature, or I think there might be some level of unawareness. So, for instance, right, like I see people writing comments to people's posts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and such, and they probably did not wake up that morning going, "I'm going to hate on others." Some do, but I think most people don't have that kind of agenda per se, but they still show up being either just highly unaware, right? A little passive aggressive in some cases. I just want to see if that's what you're seeing as well, or do you think that's what's happening, or is there a truly, you know, concerning trend, if you will, that people are venting, um, either consciously or subconsciously in this case, right? They're venting. This is their way of letting out anger, frustration. What are your thoughts?
Well, I genuinely think it's a mix. I think we've all seen enough internet trolls in our time to know that A, it is in no way anymore, we cannot argue that it's connected to any sort of anonymity, because I know people back in the day were like, oh, 4chan and all these forums, people are just saying this stuff because no one can know who they are. You just have to go to like a local news site and see all the racists come out of the woodwork, fully aware that anyone can access their Facebook page and knows who they're working for. Like, people are definitely not hiding behind that. But I would say that there is a certain self-awareness lacking, and I think that also comes down to not necessarily a lot of those people being vitriolic by nature, as you're saying, or wanting to be mean to people, but rather that they don't realize how they're being perceived. And now, what many watching might not know about me is I'm a total sucker for like shitty reality TV every now and then. And I watched this show not too long ago called The Circle, which is all about people communicating only through this like closed circuit social media application. So they live in the same house, but they never see each other.
Oh
And
wow.
the reason why I'm mentioning this is because watching it, I thought, I watched this for some like cheap, cheesy, trashy kind of entertainment, but I actually got quite engrossed in watching how people were voicing their messages because they would speak their messages, but everyone else would just read them. And people would sometimes say something, laugh, and be like, "Oh, I hope they realize I'm joking." And then it cuts to the other person being like, "What the hell did he just say to me?" And I think that sort of self awareness is often lacking from people where they don't really think about how that comes across. And not just from the point of view of like putting in emojis to make sure people get it, but also how well do people actually know you? And
Mm,
you mentioned both Facebook and LinkedIn. And on Facebook, at least for a lot of people, you might be more likely to personally know the people you have on Facebook. Not true of everyone, but on LinkedIn, if you've got thousands of connections, not all of them are going to immediately get your humor or your references. So
mm.
I do think it's a mix of thinking about how it's perceived, but also sometimes just taking a step back and thinking, if I'm reading this not in my own voice, but
Mhm.
trying to put myself in someone else's shoes, it can be a nice little exercise in empathy.
That's a really great point. I can immediately reference a recent example in which one of my friends wrote a post on LinkedIn that sparked a lot of backlash. Now, knowing him, I get his point. I understand the context of him and his voice, really, right? His ideas come from a good place, right? And it was meant to spark, I think, some provocation in terms of thinking and just breaking the humdrum of the Groundhog Day that we now live in. Yet, without that context, people called him, right, a jerk, insensitive, unempathetic, every negative term you can think of. And I was actually really surprised by the vitriol actually that came back to something that seemingly, again, from my own perspective as a friend, like it was like, oh, it's just him stating something that he's observed, right? Very logically. Yes, there is, I think, a nerve that was touched, but unbeknownst to him, right? So I do agree with you that there are, I think, different forces at play. It's not that black and white. It's not either, right? And it's not you're either vitriolic or you're not. And I think this post and the situation with my friend's verbiage just goes to show that it is a sensitive time right now. There is a lot of stress. There's a lot of uncertainty. Whether people like uncertainty or not, there is a lot of uncertainty. And just that kind of stress and anxiety can light a fuse.
Absolutely. And I think, like I said, to be honest, for me, one of the key, I guess, aspects of me making sure that I don't come across in a cruel or vitriolic way on social media is if I feel myself getting worked up writing something,
Oh, yeah.
I take a bit of like breathing space. I'll happily like I'll write out the whole, angry, frustrated rant, and then I'll go and, get a glass of water or something, have a conversation with someone, and then to reel it back. If it still
Yeah,
feels okay,
right.
I might post it. Sometimes, to be honest, all I needed was to write it out, and then I go, okay, delete everything, start over. And I think the reasoning for it is not just that sometimes you just need to vent that out, um, but it is about I guess hitting on those key points without necessarily needing to revert to or resort to, sort of throwing shit at someone. Like you can get your point across in a powerful, meaningful way without having to be needlessly petty or offensive. And I think this is where a lot of people sort of I guess, missed the mark in terms of their thoughtfulness behind this. And I think it's really easy to fall into this rabbit hole because if I post a really angry comment on someone's post and I tear them apart and then they reply with similarly personal attacks at my character, at that point, most people are unlikely to suddenly calm down and go, you know what? I'm sorry, my initial comments didn't come out quite as I wanted to. There's this ongoing joke about like the rarest thing on the internet being someone apologizing and telling someone else they were wrong. And I think that's partially because people just don't quite think before they put stuff out there. And I've been guilty of that in the past, but over the past, I don't know how many years, I've taken a step back, and I think partially that's a habit that I got into because I was quite active on messaging forums way before Facebook was a thing.
Hmm.
And even though there I'd be posting like not under my own name, there was this sense of, I guess, responsibility where I wanted, if someone were to look through everything that I'd ever posted, I didn't want there to be remnants that didn't paint me in the light of the person who I believe I am. And even though those moments of frustration are definitely part of who I am, it's it, it it wouldn't necessarily create the lasting impression of who I really am if that's the first thing people see, if that makes sense.
It does. And you just helped me arrive at another, I'm going to call it hypothesis for now. I don't know that I can definitively conclude it. Um, so this is my hypothesis. I think a lot of people write without intentionality or a clear purpose, right? So they see this gadget and some channel, right, through which they believe they can just let it out, let it out, meaning frustration, you're right, criticism of others, making fun of others, some sort of disbelief about how stupid the other person is, whatever that is, right? And I think what you're talking about, that kind of responsibility aligns to what I call intentional creation, right? It's like I'm not going to just write something unless I have a clear purpose to it, right? So if it's to invite discussion, I will say that, or at least sort of infer it in the content or in the post itself. I will say though, I haven't always been this purposeful, and I think that's that contrast that I'm thinking about from me like 10 years ago, 15 years ago on Facebook. That contrast that I'm thinking of right now, I think is forming this hypothesis, in that so Facebook does a fabulous job of reminding all of us the crap that we had posted some time ago, right? So there was a post the other day. It was probably, from the context, it was probably right before I boarded an airplane. It was late, Friday. I'm tired and I'm ready to come home, and like it was just me kind of recording my thoughts right on Facebook. And you're like, who would do that? Like, I look back now, I'm like, what the now, nothing I said was that outrageous, yet it was the intention, right? That shocked me. I'm like, was I really just like so lacking in purpose about my content that I would just like, type whatever came to mind, click post, and what did I expect, right? Like, it's like that's just odd now that I look back. Yet, not to say that, and I don't want to judge per se. Yet, I personally now believe that for us to move away from criticism, like you said, the things that you would be embarrassed if somebody found years later, to move away from that, or to lessen that, I think we do have to have more purpose and intentionality behind why we show up on social media, and what is it that we want to achieve as a result of that presence.
Well, I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate here and actually kind of go against what we were both saying. Um,
Hit me.
sim- Simply because then I start thinking, okay, a lot of people are talking about radical authenticity on LinkedIn. People are talking about, showing up as who you are. And I definitely believe in being myself on any given social media platform. But then it's a question of, where is a line drawn where the, I guess, niceness of it becomes fake. So, and I guess, I'm not completely flying in the face of what I just said because I still think there is room for that without vitriol. Because,
Agreed.
as an example, I'm on Facebook specifically, I'm usually quite outspoken politically, as an example. Like, I don't post often, but when I do, I don't really hide my beliefs or thoughts or opinions on things.
Hmm.
Um, but at the same time, even if something is written in a, whether you want to call it a frustrated manner or a very direct manner, I don't do it in a way where I'm specifically trying to take a person down or trying to put
Hmm.
someone down, but rather where the energy might come from being frustrated by something not being the way that I believe it should.
Hmm.
But I always remember this phrase, that I remember the phrase, but I do not remember where it comes from. But there was someone who said the reason why the hippie movement didn't change the world as much as they could have was because they were a lot clearer on what they were against than what they were for. And that idea of knowing what you're fighting against but not for is just like with any habit that we have.
Hmm.
We can say, oh, I'm going to stop, smoking or drinking or doing this or that. um, but when we look at people who have actually been really successful at changing bad habits, it's because, to be honest, they tend to replace them with better habits.
Hmm.
They start doing something better for themselves. And I think, um, in the same way, if we do feel like we're heading into that path of negativity because something is bothering us,
Hmm.
thinking about how we can replace that, not with some sort of fake toxic positivity. I'm not saying like, oh, how grateful am I that there are people out there that I can hate so that I can love a little bit more on the other side. Like, nah, not that. But I'm saying like maybe thinking of restructuring that messaging. And on that note, if we think about actually when we're on the other side of
Hmm.
that, when we are the recipients of someone's vitriol, when someone comments on our posts or our profiles or somehow aims a lot of negativity our way, it's easy to fall into the trap of replying in kind.
Hmm.
And what I've found actually to be incredibly effective on and off social media, but especially if I take on social media as an example, if you actually just reply with not super, I often say kill them with kindness, but I don't necessarily mean being overtly kind, but rather if you just stay your course and don't feed into the anger, if you don't fall into that, but rather basically just ask people to elaborate on their anger, more often than not, you come out looking a hell of a lot better than they do. Because I've had people try to attack my character on social media or try to tear me down, and usually I engage with it in a really calm, collected way. Even though, again, I might write a rant in a different in a note taking software or something, and then go put that to the side. But I quite like referring to it as you're handing someone a shovel and seeing if they dig themselves out of it or if they dig themselves a hole. Because if they dig themselves a hole, you're still standing up there going, "You're a hole, man."
Well, I love the challenge that you post, in response to my hypothesis. In that you're right, right? There is, I think, a difference between being authentic and what I call emotionally unregulated, right? So I think there, and you said it really well in that there is a place to be authentic without being an asshole.
Yeah,
Now, are there times when I wish I could just go like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Yeah, I would love to do that. Yet I go, "That's not." It's not that it's not that I want to hide that per se. Yet I go again back to the purpose, right? Like, what would that do?
yeah,
Or what's the outcome, right? As my dear friend Kevin would say, what's the outcome you want? If the outcome is that you want somebody to engage, that probably will shut it down, right? Or you're going to invite the kind of engagement that you didn't sign up for, that is going to spiral into something nasty, frustrating, annoying, exhausting, right? So I go, like, would I love to be able to say that? Sure. Can I say absolutely? Right? No one is telling me not to. But then I think it is about choice in going, okay, do I even respond? Right? If somebody is coming back with shit that you're just like, I can't even, right? We have a choice to go, okay, this is clearly not going in the direction that I had wanted to take this. So, but again, I think it does start with some sort of purpose or some sort of focus outcome. So again, if it is going down the right path and we go, we can add to that, right? If we can insert ourselves in such a way that will help co-create that outcome, drive to that outcome, or at least like pivot to that outcome, then yeah, be my guest, right? Go forth and be and do. Yet, I think a lot of times we just get caught up in the autopilot, right? Of, well, somebody said this, so I got to fire back, right? Well,
Mm.
how dare they? How dare they negate what I just said and challenge my assumptions and knock me down? How dare they, right? And that sort of like anger, again, it's I'm not saying, well, we can't be. Yeah, it's annoying when people go, no, no, no. Like, I hate when people mansplain to me. I hate it when people lecture to me. Yet again, it comes down to my choice of going, well, do I want to feed into that or not? And if I want to feed into that, I have other choices as well to make. It's like, well, how do I feed into that? Or in what manner do I want to either sustain it, reinforce it, or pivot? So that to me, I think is the ultimate question. Is like, what do we want to get out of this? And I again hypothesize that perhaps not all of us have been shown that kind of pathway yet.
Yeah, and I think, from the perspective of even if we just look at the authenticity bit, like I definitely take the same approach in real life. If someone says the stuff that would make me want to tell them where to shove their opinions,
Right.
I still don't, because I know that that's not an effective way to do it. And I know that as much as some part of like my primal instinct thinks to myself, do you know what would be really satisfying right now? Just like literally screaming in that dude's face. Like, I know it won't do anything, and I know it won't be satisfying in the long run. And I know it will be a lot more satisfying
Mhm.
is like destroying them with rhetoric, basically. um, and as an example, I think I've told you this story before when there was this like wildly homophobic preacher back home that was asked to speak at my school, and I still don't understand how this was okayed by anyone in the school. But um, I've seen people come up to him and shout at him, and like he'd kind of just put them down because for all of his horrific opinions and beliefs, he he was a relatively good debater when compared to people just screaming at him. But me being there, 16, 17, I thought, no, that's what he wants. He wants that so that he can say, oh, it's just the haters.
Mm.
And I remember approaching him and actively engaging in a debate with him. And I remember I still remember the feeling I had when he walked away, and I thought he wasn't able to answer my questions. He wasn't able to keep debating. And I thought, wow, this is the way I want to face opposition. This
Mhm.
is the way I want to take on the bigots, the homophobes, the misogynists of the world. Because if I can make them effectively flee from battle, anyone watching will be like, yeah, no, that dude lost. That dude flat out was wrong. And I remember having some people who were with me in like drama and stuff at the time ask me like, "Do you really think you're going to change his opinion?" And I was like, "No, I don't." But I want anyone who was there who might have felt shamed by what he said, or might have been considering to join the cause that he represents, to hear someone stand up and have a second opinion, have someone else offer an alternative from the vitriolic, hateful speech that he did. And in that way, I guess, and I think that sort of leads us well into next week. In that way, I guess from a lot of people's perspective, as a teenager, I was a bit weird. I've always kind of looked at things a little bit differently, and and amongst those things, I've never taken offense being called weird, but I know a lot of people do, and
Mhm.
that's why I'm quite excited that next week, as part of the spooky season of Halloween, I guess we're going to do W for weird. A lot of people dislike the idea of being called weird or dislike the idea of something they do being referred to as weird, but if someone calls me weird, to be honest, I tend to think them. And if they question why I'm thinking them, I say, well, the opposite of weird is normal, and normal is boring.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think, from my perspective at least, I'm just really excited to dive into that next week. But I want to offer up, obviously, the opportunity. I don't want to cut you off if you had something more to add to the ongoing discussion.
Yeah, just a really quick thought that probably would require quite a lengthy discussion in that I think both vitriol and weirdness are in the eye of the beholder. So actually, right, the priest that you speak of, I would bet that he at one point told a story from the perspective of you being vitriolic to him. Not to say that you were yet, right? I really do think there is something about how those notions are very subjective in the eye of the person who is making that judgment call. So I love to dig into weirdness with you in that spirit of, right, like who determines what's weird and normal? Right? What's normal to you may be weird to me and vice versa. Yet there is this, yeah, I think weirdness about weirdness that I'd love to dig into with you.
I can't wait, and I think it's a really good point. And I think one final thought on vitriol from that perspective: if you're thinking of leaving a vitriolic comment on something, or you're about to post something that might be perceived that way, think about it from that perspective that Sylvia just said. If that's the only thing or the first thing someone sees from you, does that represent you in the way that you would like to be seen?
Great point to end on, my friend. See you next week then.
See you next week.